In the past 100 years, the way people perform and consume music has changed drastically. Since the 1920s, we have seen the introduction of the radio, vinyl records, multi-track recording, digital signal processing, and new instruments led by the electric guitar. These technological advances have continually refined the way we produce music, including what medium we use to listen to it. In this episode, we discuss how technology has changed the way musicians perform, record, and market their music with my guest, Eric Axelson, bassist of Milliseconds, Maritime, and of course, Washington, D.C.'s The Dismemberment Plan. Welcome to the Musicscope. Eric Axelson gained notoriety as the bassist for the Dismemberment Plan, Maritime, and his most recent project, Milliseconds. The Dismemberment Plan was formed in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. in 1993, and over the next decade, they would become one of the most beloved bands in underground music, combining punk, R&B, hip-hop, and pop influences with a unique approach to instrumentation, using both traditional and electronic instruments. Their 1998 album, Emergency and I, is intelligent, funky, catchy, and a completely unique reference point for DC punk. Eric's punchy, funky, James Jamerson-influenced bass lines work with drummer Joe Easley's highly syncopated beats to drive the songs, while the Plan's guitarist, Jason Caddell, and Travis Morrison deliver catchy hooks as well as atmospheric flourishes. Eric joins me to discuss technology's influence on music and musicians in the past century.
Eric, thanks for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you coming on the Musicscope and talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, with your history with the Dismemberment Plan, you guys were known for doing a lot of work with synthesizers and other electronic components. And, even your website, I think, even back in the 90s and early 2000s, was very interactive. So as someone who embraced technology, if you were performing in 1923 instead of 2023, as an artist, what would be the toughest thing for you to adjust to?
I'm a bass player mainly, so that would be the hardest thing. Is that predates the electric bass. So I'd be on an upright, which I have played a little bit of, but I'm not great on an upright. I'm also left-handed, so finding a left-handed upright would be really hard.
Yeah,
and that's also predating microphones. So I'm assuming those guys had to play really hard to get through, with brass and everything else happening. So that'd be the worst part. That's different calluses, and that's just a whole other world. And then lately I've been singing in the most recent band, and I think that also predates microphones. So I imagine people who sang back then had massive ungodly lungs, and I don't know if I have that. So that would be, that would be a very humbling experience to be performing in 1923.
Most recorded music at that time was still done on like wax cylinders, which they use giant megaphones to. So to your point, it's like, working with the technology of the day, it was like a one-off performance too.
Yeah, my grandfather was in a band in the 40s, I guess 30s and 40s, and they cut a record, and when they went in, it cut straight to the disc. So it was like, imagine a 45 with the center hole and then 3 holes around it for stabilizing. And they would pay their money for like a 5-minute slot to go in, and there was, there's one take. There's no redos, and they would start, and the thing would start spinning and cutting straight to the I guess wax. And I think you can hear him like drop his bow when he switches from the violin to the guitar. So technology.
What kind of music was it?
So he was in Chicago, and he was in a band that would play Swedish dances. So that side of the family's Swedish, and Chicago has a pretty big Swedish immigration population. for
Yeah.
immigrant population. So, it'd be dances and whatnot. And, I have somewhere in a folder, I have a business card for the Melvin Axelson Orchestra. And he would give it
Wow.
out and he would go play these dances. Yeah, he played fiddle and he played some guitar and some piano. Oh, and accordion.
Oh, okay. Of course. Well, I mean, back in those days, it was like,
yeah, it's table stakes right there.
yeah, the accordion was like the electric guitar of those days.
Oh yeah, before Weird Al.
So going to your playing, your approach to playing bass and synth and your songcraft, it's unique, but it's also, I find it very disciplined.
Okay.
So were there guitarists or bassists who specifically drove you to work hard on your playing, and what innovations would they bring to that instrument?
I don't know about the work hard part, but I mean, so early on, I started playing bass in high school. I mean, you kept joining bands where we're all guitar players and someone has to play bass, and it ended up being me because I was never that great of a guitar player. And I think around the same time, I was learning about Motown, and someone turned me on to reggae. Like a friend in high school gave me a cassette, and I had a Bob Marley record on each side, like two different records. And I spent one weekend where I just kept flipping that tape, side to side, and just getting in love with that bass sound that Aston Barrett had.
Yeah.
I think that kind of got me into a bass mindset. I also grew up playing drums. Like I was in marching band, and I played bass drum in marching band. And I don't think people know this, but often in marching bands with four bass drums, they're all tuned differently. So you almost play it like a bass, but you're one of the strings in a bass. So you have these drum runs with on different tones. So it wasn't like you're all hitting in unison. So often you're hitting like on the offbeat or on the E of 3 and the of 4. Between other hits. And I think that kind of got me into that kind of a mindset. I guess, as far as like driving me to play more, I think as I learned of, more interesting bands, I remember hearing like Funkadelic and being like, how does Bootsy do that? Like that kind of pushed me to try to play kind of like that a little bit. Or, later on, like, Joe Lally from Fugazi, Wayne Montana from Trenchmouth, they're doing things I hadn't heard before. And I think, I don't know if it drove me, but it kind of fascinated me and made me want to kind of get in that direction. So, I think that's kind of what drove me to play, I think the way I do. The one odd thing that happened was in college, I like the Grateful Dead, and I fell into a jam band for a year, and they played a style that was not natural to me, but because it wasn't pop related, there weren't really any rules. So suddenly I was all over the neck and trying weird things, and they didn't care. Like, it's
jam. Right.
So that kind of helped me loosen up and not stay too much, in a box.
I never would have guessed that you were in a jam band
called the Time Pirates. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. They came to a party at my house, and on the way out, someone was like, "Are there any bass players here?" And I raised my hand, and suddenly I was in a band for a year.
That's wild. What about gear? Was there any influences on like how you picked, what your sound was going to be? Were you trying to emulate anyone as far as your gear?
I remember early on deciding to play with fingers because I thought it looked cool, compared, like it looked more like real, like it looks like what you saw bands in the 60s doing. So I wanted to do that. It's funny, like when you're younger and you're trying to figure out what your sound is. I had a guy I knew in my college town who was great, and he was a great bass player. And he gave me lots of advice. And in the end, none of it was something that I stuck with. Like he played an Ernie Ball Music Man, active pickup, right. Light strings, he's like, you want light strings, you want active pickups, like, all these things that really spoke to that sound of the early 90s, like,
sure.
Chili Peppers, and that really like, Joe Lally kind of has some of that going on too. And, in the end, I play heavier strings, play a P bass, it's just a very different approach. And also being lefty, like there's not a lot of room to try too much different gear out there. So my first bass was a jazz bass. My second bass was a P bass, and I haven't bought a bass since 1996.
Wow.
So just kind of, not a lot out there. I found what I liked, stuck with it. That's it.
Oh man. So D-Plan, early 90s, you guys form suburbs of DC, and then first album was recorded in 94, 95.
Yeah, the first part was recorded in 94. We recorded it in 3 different sessions. So I think started in 94 because we didn't know it was a record when we started it. It was like we were recording songs for a demo to try to find someone to work with. And then we recorded, 4 more songs the second session. And then when we finally hooked up with DeSoto, we recorded the last 4 songs in 95. So yeah,
Gotcha.
mid 90s for sure.
And then Milliseconds, you guys like just finished with Jay Robbins.
Yeah, started in 22 and ended in 23.
So in that time span, what advances in recording technology have affected your approach, or have they affected your approach to making a record?
So, when the early Dismemberment Plan days, 93, 94, 95, you'd get a boombox with a cassette and you'd find the place in the room central enough that when you were messing around in practice, that if you recorded something, you could hear a little bit of everybody, and it'd be fully blasted out. So it'd be like this weird, Jackson Pollock wash of noise, but you could be like, okay, my part's in there and I can hear what I played. We had I think Travis had a Tascam, I think it was an 8-track or 4-track.
Okay.
So we record straight to that sometimes, get these really blown out, distorted sounds. In a comparison, now, so my band now, we live in 3 different cities and we practice online. So there's an online service called Jam Kazam. So we go through that. Joe's, all of his drums are mic'd. My bass is going through a bunch of amp emulators. So that's all mic'd, and you can record everything and go back and listen to exactly what you played, which we didn't have that luxury back then. So it's kind of night and day. And and writing wise, that helps too. Is like shoot with DAWs versus trying to track back then, and you record it for the first time when you're actually in the studio.
Yeah.
And I guess the new band doesn't use keyboards, but when I think about the evolution of tech, early Dismemberment Plan was no keyboards. And then I think Travis swapped a guitar for a Casio tone, like one of those wood paneled Casios.
Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah, and that would have been late 95. So after the first record, we got that in Boston and then ran that through a Bassman into a 112. So you get this really kind of farty synthy sound. And at some point, that was fun, and then it wears out. And then we bought a Yamaha Portasound and some, a more modern Roland with EQ filters. You could get some like that sound in Life of Possibilities, is like messing with the EQ filter to open it up to get that kind of wah sound.
Gotcha.
And that eventually evolved into, got a sampler. We got an EMU 4000 with the zip disk upgrade. And at that point, I think we sampled both of those keyboards, so we'd have them on there. And then at that point, so Jason and Travis were more of the sampler guys, and they would go nuts and sample video game sounds or records they bought at thrift stores, or
I remember Dismemberment Plan Gets Rich is thick with all these ridiculous sounds.
Yeah, it's like a buffet of random noises. Yeah.
And I think it's probably the funniest song that you guys ever put out. But it's funny that EMU, and it's funny you mentioned the zip disk. That was I forget how many. Do you remember how many megs that was?
I want to say 32.
I want to say it was 32, and it was mind blowing at the time. It was how in the world could you ever use 32 megs of memory? It was,
and I think
over the top.
I think the first EMU we had didn't have the zip, and I want to say Travis got it upgraded at a shop where they put a zip in there. And I'd never seen a zip disk then. And I remember us traveling, with all your gear, you'd have a disc folder with a zip disk and a backup zip disk in case that one got broken or damaged.
Right.
And down the road, we bought a second EMU because if you have a hardware failure and half of your record is synth based, what are you going to do? So we would travel with 2 EMUs and probably 4 zip disks. Eventually, I forgot what year that was, but we went to a laptop and we'd run it through. We went to a Reason eventually, but I don't remember what we used back in 02, 03. But I remember a couple of times the laptop would crash during a show and you'd hear the Windows sound through these massive speakers. So yeah.
Oh man. Oh wow. It's terrible.
Yeah. So I guess So the writing wise, so how you do things at home for the writing process, and then the gear you use is night and day. And then of course, like the studio, like you said, like back then in '95, that would have been all tape. Now Jay wanted us to track to tape and then bounce to digital, but we were short on time, so we didn't. But I feel like the last couple of records I've worked on have been, I think, straight digital. Just,
Okay.
for functionality.
Yeah. So a little bit of a departure. I mean, back in the day, talking about digital and that kind of landscape where everything digital was kind of new. I remember out of all, when you started getting into like websites and like bands' websites, they would have usually a splash page where it'd be like, hey, look at this band, and you click on the picture of the guys in the band, and then it would be like, here's our tour dates, and then there'd be another link to like bio, and that might be it. Where Dismemberment Plan always had like this really interactive website, and I forgive me, the feature was like the top 5 songs of all time, like this week.
Yeah, it was the best 10 songs of all time right now.
Right now, yeah.
And that was, I think, because Travis was a graphic designer and Joe was a programmer, and I guess Travis also coded back then.
Gotcha.
So I think Travis did most of the building. Joe, I think, did some of the back end. But you're right. I mean, that was before MySpace and all that stuff. And I think it didn't occur to me at the time how different it was. But, in hindsight, it's like, oh, yeah. So if this band is putting up new content every week, it's a reason for people to go check back to see what they're up to. And then
I think it made you guys so personable to people. They were like, oh, man, these guys really care about, music. And they want to, it's like that kind of connection where you can, oh, man, these guys they're like me. They like such and such song, and whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And we would take turns doing the 10 songs. So depending who it is, it may be like someone talking about, like half of the songs could be Zeppelin because someone's on a Zeppelin kick, or it could be some band we just played with in Bloomington, Indiana, and like their song goes on there because they were great and that's the song. But because before that, we'd be at a show and you'd have like a mailing list at the merch table, and people would sign up, and that was early email days. And we would I was cleaning up recently, and I found these old postcards, and we'd mail out postcards to people that got on the mailing list, and hope to God they still live there, because like college kids or if they're drunk and they wrote it down all blurred, and you're like, this goes to some random person, like, what the hell's a dismemberment plan? And that was interaction, and that felt really forward thinking until like after we broke up, like MySpace came out, and suddenly everyone's like, talking about their feelings. And
well, and now, so fast forward to present day and the internet, and of course everything is social media. How has that changed? It seems like there's increased accessibility for people who follow you. Has that changed the way you interact with people, with your fans?
A little. So when we were united in 2011, at that point, we got Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram, and and use that as a way to kind of let people know what we're up to. But I feel like at that point, probably because at that point we had careers and families, so it's hard to be as interactive and stay on top of it like we did. But not like we did back then when like the band was all you did, and you had a temp job you were trying to quit, and so I think had we been younger, I think we would have taken to that like a fish to water. But we definitely used it. But so it's funny because I got off Facebook after the 2016 election because it just got too loud, and I just it wasn't making me happy. But with Milliseconds, once we got the songs all mixed and mastered, I was like, well, we got to let people know, and like, I'm not going to call 100 friends. I don't have that time. So put up a Facebook page and put up a Instagram page. And through that started like, posted through the Dismemberment Plan sites. And I realized there's all these messages we hadn't responded to. So the other night I was responding to messages of people who wrote like 6 or 12 months ago. And like one guy's like, hey, what are the bass notes to what do you want me to say? So I sat there and like typed out what the notes were.
Wow.
And like there was like a 16-year-old kid who was like, "Hey, you guys are new to me, and I'm getting into kind of weirder music, and that kind of stuff's fun." But it's. I think back then we would have been a lot more interactive, and now something where like I checked that because I hadn't seen it in forever, and people are hearing back from me a year later, and they may not hear again for like another year. So it's yeah, it's kind of mixed. I do wonder like how obsessive younger bands are about those things, or maybe their managers just do it, or it's really easy to get sucked into that and just like have that be your reality versus like just getting out there and being at a show.
But that's pretty cool that, someone younger, just like, you and I are within the same age group.
Yeah.
And, you go back and you look at, you kind of do this thing where you find a band that you like, and you go like, oh, well, they mentioned this band and they mentioned this band. And so you dig back and you're like, oh man.
Yeah.
And you kind of peel back the layers and you figure out where your heroes kind of came from. And, for a younger person to say like, hey, what notes were you playing? And
yeah, totally.
That's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah. It's always wild to me to find people that young listening to us, but you kind of forget like that's music in general. Like, was it weird that in 1989, I loved the Grateful Dead and they were a band from 20 years ago. So probably no weirder than some kid in 2023 being like, oh, Emergency and I, which is, before they were born. Just, it resonates with certain people. And I mean, shoot, a couple of years back, I met my sister's high school friend's son, who was a freshman at VCU. And he was talking about how much him and his friends like Dismemberment Plan. I was like, you kidding me? Is this because your mom knows us? And he goes, no, we just, found you on a message board. And I was like, a message board?
Wow.
And it's just like, being in the band, you forget that people still hand off your music and talk about it. And it's a living thing. You don't always know what's happening.
That's great. I'm glad that they're finding that.
Yeah, it's cool to know that it resonates still and has some sort of longevity to it, because you never know.
So with technology, it's changed so much, and again, like in the past few podcasts, we've been talking about the evolution of like recording machines, and then evolution of the electric guitar, and all these different mediums that we're used to that have evolved through just technology and the evolution of technology. So with modern technology, specifically with things becoming more and more mobile, and you can, legitimately create an entire record on your cell phone now,
Right.
and then promote it through social media on apps on your cell phone. So with that, has technology, first of all, truly allowed musicians to become more self-reliant, and are there any drawbacks to that?
I mean, definitely makes you more self-reliant. I tracked at home and Reason for a long, long time, and with that, you can write your drum beats, and there's banks of synthesizers and different sounds, and I probably should have dug deeper with it. I kind of stayed on the surface, and in hindsight, there's probably more I could have done there. But eventually, I could move to Logic, and I had to update my my interface, and I got a UA Apollo Twin. And with
Nice.
that, with that, you get these emulators of classic compressors and preamps and all these things that it probably doesn't sound exactly like the real thing, but it sounds damn close. And if you're making a record at home, you're running your mic through a 610, and it's like, oh, I couldn't afford to do that on my own. So I think the self-reliance, it's there. I do wonder sometimes probably more for rock records at home. Like, it seems like it can suck some of the air out of it. Whereas like, electronic music, like if you're listening to someone who's like a modern day Bjork or a Square Pusher or that kind of thing, like a couple guys at work make electronic music. When I hear it, it sounds great. And I know it's all home and in the box. Actually, some of them do a lot of hardware stuff too. I think that stuff where you don't expect as much air. I think the when we recorded recently, like we've been writing at home and demoing at home, and we got the Magpie cage with with Jay Robbins to record, and suddenly like it's someone who knows how to set the compressors right and get the mics right and tune the drums right, and everything just sounds amazing. And you kind of realize that you don't get that in your basement. Like you get an approximation of it, but it's just different when you're with someone who is that's their job. They're with that every day, and they understand the interaction. It's just different. I don't know. It made me want to kind of work outside the box more.
Yeah.
I have some friends at work who also have been more prone to buying hardware lately. Like one guy got off a DAW and he went and bought a 8 or 16 track Roland digital recorder with with a board. So he's suddenly like auxes and buses and doing it all tactile because he got tired of writing on his computer screen. So he's trying to do everything outside of the computer. And I don't think I have that gene, but I love the idea that friends are doing that. Like they want to get their hands on knobs and on real things versus, the robot.
Well, from your experience and, coming up with with D-Plan and what you guys were doing in the late 90s, early 2000s and paired to everything on a computer, like, is there a difference between, is there, even if it's tactile where you're feeling the knob and you're turning it versus, is there a difference in experimentation or kind of being all thumbs and not knowing exactly what you're doing versus like preset 1, this sound?
Yeah. I mean, for me, like I've never been the studio guy in any of my bands. So I'm the preset guy. Like when I'm in Logic and I'm going to track some vocals at home to demo them, I go through and there's like vocal presence, vocal air, vocal grit, and those all, they're dialing in a little bit of compression and a little bit of, gain and a little bit of this to, stuff that I wouldn't know how to do on my own. So that is, I mean, in some ways that's freeing because you can make it sound close enough. But you're right, like you kind of don't get the happy accidents. You don't get the thing where you're messing around with the hardware. I mean, like, shoot, what's the Phil Collins story with the In the Air Tonight where like they left the talk back on and it went go through some sort of gate, and they, by doing that, you're like, oh, that's amazing. You probably are gonna...
Yeah, the same thing happened with they did that on purpose with Bowie with Heroes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
They had the gates, they had gates, and if he hit, they set it at a certain level, and once he hit a certain volume level, the next gate would open up and all this room ambience would come in.
Yeah, and I think you probably lose a little bit of that, which I think is probably where some of the magic happens in songwriting. We think back to old Beatles records where they're trying to figure out the echo chamber, or U2 records trying to figure out how to make that delay work in some kind of crappy small Dublin studio. And I think some of that like tinkering and like mad scientist stuff you don't get when you're just like facing Logic and going through the presets. Even like the blanking on the term, but if I'm in a software instrument in Logic, like there's even it's like an auto box where there's like 8 different things you can do that will make it sound different, and you can kind of drag between those and get different sounds. So you don't have to think about like if you want a low pass filter or if you want to try to run a phaser on it. Like it's all baked in for you. I don't know.
Think one of the really interesting things too is that maybe we don't take into account is like when you're learning an instrument or you're learning how to record, like the absolute magic of YouTube as far as a place to in Wikipedia and other places where you can to gather information, where you used to like either A, have to get a book and research it, or B, you would find someone and you'd find like you'd see a band from your high school and you'd be like, oh, he knows this weird chord, or he did this one thing. How did you do that? And they goes, oh yeah, well, you just do this and this and this. And you go, okay. And that's how you picked up a technique versus like, I want to play like Fugazi, and you Google like Fugazi lesson on YouTube and like, they go, yeah, this is exactly what they do. And
yeah. And there's multiple variations. I remember in high school, like junior, senior year, in the same week, like one guy showing me how to play Sunday Bloody Sunday, and another guy showing me how to play Alex Chilton by the Replacements, and but if I don't know those guys, I didn't have the ear to figure those out. But you're right. Like if you want to learn, whatever crazy song, go on, what's that called? All tabs or
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all on there with the videos, and I think it's a good thing because if you want to learn anything, it's on there. If you want to learn how to tune to open D, someone can show you how to do that. If you want to learn what Mixolydian mode is, it's on there, and that's kind of amazing because if you want to learn it, it'd be hard to find something that you can't find a video or a website explaining. Which we didn't have in the 90s, so you had to figure it out or have someone teach you.
This has slowly become the old man podcast. Back in the 90s.
Get off my lawn.
Are there any new technologies that have been introduced that do you think will bring more change to musicians?
More change? I mean, the one thing that's top of mind is the way my band practices there's a service called Jamkazam, which is like Zoom for music. So, the guitar player's in Philly, the drummer's in DC, and I'm in Richmond. And, the drummer clicks in and we all hit on the one. And it's crazy that there's not too much latency that we all can play together at that distance. And doing it, we're all mic'd separately. So if we want to record what we're playing in a band practice, we can get stems. So I can get just the bass part or just the vocal part and hear that what we played, going back to that boombox thing, like, we couldn't parse that out like that. So that I think, allows me to play music with people in other cities. If you're older in a band and it's hard to get out of the house because you have a young kid, but you could play in the basement on Jamkazam and, and not have to go to the warehouse for practice, like that kind of frees that up. So I think that's pretty big. Change wise, I don't know. It's hard to imagine. Like, I feel like we're deep in the golden age of the DAW and the technical ability. Like, there's so many things you can do with music now in our computers. It's hard to imagine what else is out there that wouldn't make things bad. Like, I think we have so many good things right now. Like, at some point, if you get AI writing music, like I can't, there may be some good in that. Like, I don't know, but I can't wrap my head around what that is. So I don't know. I mean, are there things you thought of that would be like a new tech that would change how we play?
It's a good question. The funny part about it is I start, I think with every trend, there's kind of a reaction against it. And as technology has gotten more and more convenient and more mobile, and everything's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, I think you see so many young artists who, they go back to, you can look at vinyl records, for example. And vinyl records outsold CDs for the first time in however many years, and I think 2021.
Right.
Or 2020. And it's, that's huge. That is a technology, from the 1940s. And it was the technology through the 90s. And, it's kind of come back around. And then you see, I think particularly in folk music and maybe in, kind of folk and country kind of circles, you see this kind of trend towards the more vintage thing where you sit around and play and harmonize together, and people are trying to record using one microphone and whose vocal placement and who, when someone does a solo, they step up into it. I don't think that rock is quite caught up there.
Both of those things to me, though, aren't, I guess they're not quite new technologies. It's more of like a reversion back to previous things. Like I know there's labels out there that just do cassettes now, and
it's funny to see cassettes back out there.
I think we both probably have a soft spot for that kind of cassette hits. I found a cassette label, I think it's out of Baltimore. And I don't have a cassette player, so I ended up buying, the download on Bandcamp instead. But I like the fact that the present cassettes and kids are buying them and they're getting cars with cassette players. And well, I think that if anything, instead of new technology changing how people play, maybe it's more reverting back to older technology, like back to the one mic thing.
Yeah.
The same guy I mentioned earlier on, the guy who bought a 16-track digital recorder, but he also is doing stuff where he's tracking his drums with one mic just to see how, what kind of cool trashy sound can you get when you put a 57 like on the floor or,
There's a guy I used to work with and we worked in music retail together and they had like $50 guitar cables and $100 mic cables and these real like precision wound casings that's going to eliminate electromagnetic sounds. We were sitting there talking and I'm like, man, do you think they work? And he goes, all that Motown stuff that you like, they didn't have it. And I was like, well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate the time, and it's been great talking to you, and I appreciate all your input on not only Dismemberment Plan's history and your experience, but kind of your take on technology in general with music.
All right, thanks for having me.
I want to thank my guest, Eric Axelson. Check out Eric's current band, Milliseconds, on all the socials. They make their live debut on May 20th in Fredericksburg, Virginia, with all proceeds going to the Fredericksburg Food Bank. You can also hear Eric's body of work with the Dismemberment Plan and Maritime on your favorite streaming platforms. While you're there, feel free to subscribe to this podcast and explore more of music's winding history. Thanks for listening to the Musicscope. I'm Mike Grubb.